Coming up, George Finney joins us to talk about the illusion of perfect security, why we don't need magic wands, and how to have better cyber hygiene by looking at habits. We got tips on getting out of useless meetings and how you can actually get more done in the limited amount of time that you have, and some updates on the next IPO and how that's looking, as well as any of the other insights we got on the week and the state of security. So there's a lot we're going to cover today. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Business Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by... Are you getting pressure to improve your data security? Would you like a faster, easier, better way to patch? Then you need to check out Automox. Automox is a cloud-native platform that patches and manages every endpoint, even remote servers and devices, including Windows, Mac, Linux, and third-party software from a single dashboard. Improve your cyber hygiene, reduce your attack surface, and save 90% of the effort you spend patching. Automox, your patching system of record. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting at blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Business Security Weekly. It's episode number 85. It's Monday, May 14th, 2018. We're recording it live. I don't know if we can record it not live, so I don't know why I bothered to say that. What's cool about episode 85 is I've got a reference later on to one of the earlier episodes, like 14 or 15 that we did. So Paul and I have been at this a long time, and our goal here is to explore the business of security so we can better improve the security of business. It's looking at one to inform the other. We want to be your trusted source on looking at leadership, communication, and innovation in the state of security. So this is something all of us need, and we want to bring it to you. I'm Michael Santarcangelo, your straight-talking guide to overcome friction, translate your value into understanding, and get the results you wanted with better performance. And join me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island is the ever-dapper and fantastic host, Paul Asadorian.
Michael, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here doing the show. I'm excited. I'm excited to just sit around, kick it old school and just have good conversations. So
it's almost as exciting as being in person with you in Boston last week.
That's right. And I don't think we can. We did have dinner. But
I was gonna say we can't talk about it.
All we know
is that despite having 4 kids, I'm not as subtle as I'd like to think I am. I think that was the big lesson from the night is don't count on me for subtlety.
Yes. It was a good time. We were at Source Boston. I feel like I didn't until dinner. I feel like I didn't get as much quality time with you, Michael, as we normally get at conferences. It was kind of crazy. I got these glasses. It's one of the reasons I wore them, Michael, to remind everyone. And I will plug the vendor because I thought it was such a cool and innovative giveaway. I'm not sure what it cost them. I really would like to follow up and kind of see what these things cost. But these are like knockoff gunners. I don't know if any of you guys or gals, there you go, Michael's got a matching pair. And if any of you guys or gals in the audience wear gunners, I mean, if you wear regular glasses, you can get them tinted with this, but it basically just makes the screen brighter and easier to read, which I found as I got into my 40s was increasingly important. And this was a free giveaway. It's actually branded on the side with the sponsor, Tivo Networks, and I thought it was a fantastic giveaway. It's a great conversation starter because I still feel like these glasses are like people that work in technology overwhelmingly like, oh, what are those? Like it's not like everyone that sits in a cubicle is wearing these glasses yet. I feel like it's on the cusp of that. So that was a cool giveaway to be like, oh, what do they do? How does it work? Blah, blah, blah.
Well, I'm going to add a dimension to it too.
You wear it all the time, right? And so your logo is on the person's glasses all the time. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, and there's another element to it too, and what they do is they filter out the blue light. So if you're at a computer screen all day and you find you're always rubbing your eyes, they filter out the blue light, so you get that lack of fatigue, which is a fantastic benefit. But there's another benefit. blue light is what disrupts our melatonin, which is how we generate the chemical to go to sleep at night. So a lot of places, if you start really looking at our health, it'll say, no blue light after 7 o'clock at night. Okay, well, good luck with that, because that's really tough. And so what happens is a lot of people will say, once it gets to be about dusk time, you put on your amber glasses and you start blocking it. So very much similar to gunner's glasses. I used to use them a lot when I was doing more triathlons. I know I look like it today, but it makes everything crisper and faster.
Crisper.
Not sure why it matters, but it looked cool, so that's what we did. So lots of stuff there, and we got some more updates, and we'll talk about Source when we get to the next segment. But I'm really excited to introduce to everybody George Finney. I got introduced to George through Sean Tuma. So Sean's both helped out now co-hosting and did a couple of those fantastic segments. And George and Sean had gone to lunch, and Sean sent me a note and said, "I've got to introduce you to this guy. You're gonna love him." And I think George and I we try to talk regularly. I just realized we're a little behind, but absolutely brilliant. Been fascinating. We've done some work together. George is an author. I'm actually fascinated about a bunch of things. So George is an author. George is a pretty accomplished speaker. He's built a fantastic team. You hear me talk a lot about influence without authority. That's a concept George and I have kicked around quite a bit. And he's recently been, well, I say recently, George, if I got that wrong, we'll correct it. But he's been looking at habits and how to better instill habits and cyber hygiene and things that we can do and make a difference on. And I said, well, gosh, you got to come talk to us about that. And then we got talking about all the prep and the ways he did it. So I could gush about George all day, but George is a CISO at SMU. He's doing some fantastic stuff and trying to improve the industry. Welcome, finally, to Business Security Weekly, George.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
It is my pleasure. All right, so let's do this, because a lot of times when we there's so much that I want to dive into, and just to kind of remind us and everybody else. So I want to talk to George. He's got a great article out on the illusion of perfect security. I want to talk about the process of writing the book, how it's gone since then, and then how that's all shifted and evolved into the 9 cybersecurity habits. That said, George, how did you end up in security, and where does law school fit into security for you? And then how do you end up as a CISO? What's your journey been like?
So when I finished college, I was a liberal arts major. So no technology experience background at all. I started out working for GTE back before they were Verizon, and I got this kind of kick in the pants to go do some interesting stuff with technology, and it's just kind of snowballed from there. Went to a couple of different startups, and through my experiences there, I got interested in open source software. That got me interested in the law, understanding how contracts work. And through that process, I started work at SMU to work here during the day and go to the law school at night. And SMU is just a great place to be. They made me an offer to keep me around after law school. And the intersection between cybersecurity and the law is kind of a tight fit. There aren't a lot of CISOs out there that are also attorneys. A handful here and there. I've probably met maybe 10 over the course of the last decade. But it's been an interesting trip. So I love technology. I kind of geek out at things like open source. I've rewritten codes for some open source software projects. I've been a network engineer for a long time. I've done a lot of different things, sysadmin hats, but gosh, being a CISO is so interesting. I think it's intellectually challenging, it's stimulating, and it helps that helps keep me energized every day with exploring something, going down a rabbit hole to figure something out, or just connecting with someone in a different way. I get a lot of energy out of it.
I love that. Now, so in your role then, because this is something, and Paul and I have chatted about this a little bit too, you've got a pretty interesting role. I mean, it wasn't just, for all of us, there wasn't an option to go get a degree in security. It was, get a degree and kind of figure out. A lot of us have wound our way here. All of the things that you've done feels like you should be pretty conversant with a lot of different folks and actually understand something from their experience. Has that been the way it's unfolded for you? And then do you think that that's valuable? So if somebody looking to be a CISO today might need to be a little bit broader and perhaps a little less deep.
I think there's this element of specialization in cybersecurity that exists today that wasn't the case maybe 10 years ago. So, typically when you look at a cybersecurity person, you see, a background, maybe in defense, maybe they came up through networking or telecommunications, maybe they came up through the Unix Linux side, but over that course of time, maybe they got interested in something, but they also still had that big picture, right? So a Linux sysadmin knows how operating systems work, whether or not they've got a degree in it. They came up and, but they had the big picture. Today, kids coming out of college, their first job is going to be at a SOC. And, their first experience is going to be working tickets all day long. And I think that specialization is a problem. I think it's going to become a problem for CISOs as well. There's kind of this divide of, folks. You can be a CISO with a MBA today. That's cool. You're really business focused. You understand and can talk to business folks in the right way, or maybe you've come up through the technology ranks, got your MBA, and that's how you're going to be a CISO. But I think that's still a challenge, right? We've seen the transition from CISOs reporting to the CIO, where there's a really strong technology connection, and I think there's still 50% or more of CISOs reporting to CIOs out there. But the challenge is, once you move beyond that, how do you make those connections with your CFO or with your legal affairs office or risk or internal audit or any business department head whose processes you might be recommending updating or changing. So, gosh, it's such a it's such a broad spectrum. I think being able to build relationships is probably the biggest key in being a CISO. But absolutely, it's table stakes to have a great security operations group. And if you don't have that, you can't build those relationships inside IT. So I think you have to be able to do both.
We look at it on the show all the time. There's a hefty balance of things we need to be able to do. But you've done it well. Let's talk about your book. No more magic wands. What was the genesis of this? Like, some of the other folks we've talked to have written books. Some think about writing books. Some think, oh, no, not me. So did you always have the desire to write, or was this born out of a frustration or an opportunity? Set us up, and what would people get when they read the book?
So I've always been a writer. I've been writing since high school. But after law school, I made a kind of a concerted effort to really focus on my writing. I took some writing classes, went to some writing conferences, workshops, got better and better. Hopefully. But writing the book, actually, the genesis came from I got the opportunity to teach a class for undergrads here, kind of an intro to cybersecurity course. And what I found was the kids who had no background, maybe they're from the art school or maybe they're from the business school, they don't have a background in technology. So, teaching them some kind of rigorous technology concepts like encryption, I didn't like the way, we approach that from such a technical perspective. So, I finished teaching the class and I decided, hey, I think there's a market here, right? When we write security books, we generally market them to security people, which is a fairly limited audience. What if we increase that audience to just any layperson? And there's this whole genre of professional development books out there written for managers, whether you're in sales or accounting. So the No More Magic Wands is kind of like a Who Moved My Cheese for cybersecurity professionals, but it carries over for folks who are, in executive positions, and kind of conveys some of those lessons that you need to learn, and kind of brings them to the business. So the main character isn't a security person; she's a business elf. It's a kind of a case study in a business that makes magic wands that gets hacked, and it's staffed by all fairy tale creatures. But it makes it approachable in a way that a technical compliance guide just wouldn't be approachable to a layperson. And I think in order to get better at security, we need to reach out to folks who we wouldn't have thought to partner with before. And I think opening that up will help us get better at security overall.
George, I have a question about writing. I took a job where writing was a significant portion of my job, and I quickly realized that I had no idea how to write. And I really thought, and I think a lot of people are in this very same situation today, and that is I can pass a spelling check and a grammar check, and it's technically accurate. So if I can check those 3 boxes, like, my writing's good. Like, I'm good and I can put it out there. And of course, I realized a whole bunch of things about writing once I was doing it semi-professionally. But above and beyond those 3 things, which are obviously important, like, what advice do you have for people that when they write in that way, other people look at it and go, wow, you're like, that writing is terrible. Like, what is it about writing that goes beyond those fundamentals that us as nerds are like, spelling's good, grammar's good, and technically accurate. Like, I'm good, yay.
Right. You know, I remember my first year in college, I was almost kicked out because I was kind of a bad writer. And, you know, I'd been in journalism in high school. I thought I'd learned to write well. But as it turns out, I wrote well one way, which was for a certain kind of article. So, you know, maybe I think mastering all different kinds of writing is a key skill, right? You maybe need to be persuasive in some situations, whereas, you know, in a root cause analysis document, you don't. Maybe in a policy or in an incident response plan, it has to be written so that, you know, a person in the 7th grade can understand it. And structure, I think structure is a big key. This might be surprising, but in law school, you know, they teach you again a new style of writing. But the focus even in law school is on making writing simpler. So shorter sentences, just active voice instead of using passive voice. You know, those kinds of things make writing that much easier to read. And I think, you know, the feedback I keep getting about my writing, you know, it's not just, oh, you know, he's this great writer. It's you took a really complicated concept, and I probably made it even more complicated with all of the references or stuff I added, but somehow I told a story and I simplified it so that anyone could understand it, right? So, you know, the advice I give people is pretend you're writing for your mom or your grandma, and, you know, would they understand it, and, you know, would they, you know, be moved by it? And I think that's a good standard to hold yourself to.
Well, and it was one of the lessons I learned early on as well. My sentences were too verbose and more like I spoke, and that took some retraining. And I'm not sure, like, in school, depending on where you go to school, you may learn one method or the other. But I think let's talk about technical writing. I'm writing a blog post to communicate to maybe a more technical audience or communicate a technical topic to a wider audience. I think your advice of having your sentences shorter, more concise, very action-oriented is extremely important. And in fact, my editorial team where I worked, who was fantastic, that was one of the first lessons they taught me. They're like, you don't need all these extra words in there. Like, shorten down, what's your point, kind of thing. And that was super helpful.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's easy to want to, you know, look like you're, you know, make yourself look smarter, or use bigger words, you know, break out the thesaurus. That's the opposite advice of what you should actually be doing.
Well, and so as a good example of that, you penned an article for the Forbes Technology Council, The Illusion of Perfect Cybersecurity. I put the link up in the show notes. This was delightful. So just Paul, when he talks about structure and making all short, it's easy to read. But, you know, George, you also talked about making examples. You open up with a great quote from Helen Keller, and then you give a story, and you say, like, you kind of execute all those things. What was the response to this overall?
You know, I would say this article in particular, I've written a couple of articles for Forbes, a couple of articles for Security Roundtable, or just my blog or whatever. But that illusion of perfect cybersecurity is one of the most read articles I've had. So, I mean, it's kind of you know, mind-blowing a little bit. But, you know, the secret is I kind of have a formula for writing. You know, I like to start off with something relatable, whether it's a movie or a quote or something. But I try and, you know, take that from an unexpected angle, right? So if I'm writing about perfect security, using a quote by Helen Keller not cybersecurity related at all, but also maybe a little inspirational, right? If
Yep.
you can overcome being deaf or blind or disabled or whatever, if you can relate that back to how we can get better at security, I think that really resonates with people, and I think hopefully it's inspiring people to look at security a different way and make changes as a result of that.
Again, it's a great article, and I really think people should go read it. I'm going to see if this works as a setup. I'm going to pull one line out of it that I really liked, and we'll see if I can transition us to the 9 cybersecurity habits you got. But this is a quote direct from your thing. Rather than attempting to create perfect security, let's instead think of ourselves as daring adventurers being driven by our imperfections. Short, artful, witty. I like it. How does that get us to the cybersecurity habits? Like, to me, because I know you, that says a lot about your approach and the way that you reach out to people. So whether that works or not, 9 cybersecurity habits, give us some of the background on the genesis of this, if you would, please.
So I'll just give a little bit of credit to my wife. She's got a quote. She I don't know that she knows that she's quoting Voltaire, but she says, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." And I think we have this tendency in security to always go for the entirely perfect, 100% great,
Yep.
and we need to take steps to get there. So again, as I was thinking about security for the layperson, so it all starts with a New Year's resolution. So my New Year's resolution last year was to do a little bit more security writing and actually start a blog. But I started with this premise that security isn't a skill. It's not a competency that you can just give to someone. It's a behavior. And as a behavior, security works more like not just a single habit, but a collection of multiple habits. So what I did is I compiled this database of all of the security advice we give to people, whether it's don't write your password down, don't leave your password on a sticky note under your keyboard or whatever, and I tried to classify them into categories. So if those tips are examples of what we expect in terms of habits, then maybe we can generalize and come up with a framework or a pedagogy, if you will, for how we think we can train security people to change their habits, to change their behaviors, and actually come out with real security change. So this one thing that I'm particularly passionate about, and the reason that I'm writing in this area is I think we're making progress in terms of security technology like never before, and the things that we're doing in terms of automation or AI are amazing, and not to say that that isn't needed or isn't progressing, but we're at a standstill when it comes to improving how people behave. So in security we say people, processing, technology, but what we're saying today is just technology, not people so much. People are the weakest link. We've almost written them off, and why we've done that? Well, maybe they're irrational, maybe they're unpredictable, but I think people are predictably irrational, and I think we need to understand that. And if we somehow can change the way we do security training with that in mind, I think we can have we can get rid of well, maybe we'll never be able to get rid of saying that people are the weakest link, but I think we can make progress. And again, taking that quote you read, we don't have to make people perfect, but I think we can make them a lot better. Even if we only make a 20 or 30% improvement in how they interact with the world around them, that will be a massive shift in terms of where we're at in terms of people getting breached or identity theft or whatever else, social engineering that you can think of.
Well, what I like about this too is that you're breaking it down in a way that lets us fundamentally change the conversations that we're having, which I really enjoy. Now, you did something in order to prepare for this when you were getting ready to first present this as a keynote, and you hired a presentation coach, a speaking coach. Tell us about what drove that decision and what you learned in the process. I mean, high level, what you learned.
So at a super high level, I'm kind of self-conscious about how often I say So, people like the way I talk generally. They think that I'm smart. That's great. But I would always get this feedback. You kind of said a little too much. I haven't been keeping track of how much I'm saying by the way, in this interview. But I thought, okay, well, let me go, talk to a speech coach and, run this 9 Habits presentation by her and, see what, she'll come up with. So I did what everybody does on the internet today to find a speech coach. I went on Yelp and I found this great coach. She's got 40 years experience as a speech coach, speech therapist. And I think it was really, it was really mind blowing. I'd gone to, public speaking classes in the past before, different employers have sponsored that. But it's very different to sit down with a speech coach and work on a specific speech. So, generally, you go to Toastmasters and, they'll ring that little bell if you say, and eventually you're conditioned to not want to say, anymore. And that's great. But I wanted to go a step further and see if I could, get some habits or figure out how to speak better. I mean, one of the things that was extremely helpful for me was, don't try and memorize your speech. What we're not going to do is, tell you some specific things you have to do, but let's teach you how to practice doing it. Mm-hmm. So the standard advice is stand in front of a mirror and give your speech and just do it repetitively until you have it down. Her advice was a little different, and I'm paraphrasing her a little bit, but her advice was if you're taking someone on a tour of campus, for example, you're going to know where the highlights of that tour are. You're going to know some history about each one of those places that you're going to stop on that tour, and think of your speech in terms of showing people this wonderful world that you've created. And as you walk through those places, you might see in the audience something that maybe something is more interesting over on this side of campus rather than the other. So, instead of, walking, by the water fountain that day that you're going to point out, maybe, you're going to show them the library. And I think thinking of a speech in terms of that, sure, I did the practice, the preparation. You want to learn how to make eye contact with people in the crowd and feel comfortable doing that. Another generic piece of advice that people get when they're giving a speech is, scan the crowd so that, you're making, and that doesn't work. What works is, making direct eye contact with someone for several seconds and then moving on and making direct eye contact again, but not in, a rigorous fashion. You make it feel natural.
not so much intensity, right?
Yeah, not in a creepy way. I try not to be creepy.
That's actually what I was thinking, Paul. And then I thought, all right, let me choose a different word as we do it.
A lot of what George is saying too, I've learned in where my speaking coaches largely are SANS instructors, and I always ask the top-ranking instructors from the SANS Institute who spend 6 days multiple times a year teaching for 8 hours a day, or there's breaks in there, right? But they've logged a ton of hours speaking, and they're scored very rigorously. And you hit on quite a few things, George, that they've told me over the years. Make eye contact with different people in the audience. Avoid using not just but they call them filler words, because you can get out of your habits, but then if you're not careful, you'll replace it with some other kind of filler word or sound, and that's equally as bad, if not worse. So, all of that advice is definitely stuff I've learned. And in going to classes and when you practice, I think that's another thing too. Not just to go in front of a mirror, but I think practice is logging hours in front of people. And I try and do that today with my own talks. I definitely find a smaller venue that maybe I'll give my speech first, and then if they make a recording, that's great. I can analyze it. Of course, I can analyze my own speech by going and listening to my own podcast, which I do occasionally as well, and I think that's another important piece of advice. I'm not sure if you have the same advice, but anytime you have an opportunity to listen to yourself give a presentation, you can hear all those things and take notes and continually improve.
The first time I gave my 9 Habits speech, I gave it here at SMU as a part of Security Awareness Month. And, we had a whole security fair, and it was a big thing. We partnered with HR to get it. There were probably 300 people that showed up to the fair itself, but 2 people showed up to my talk. So it was a perfect chance to rehearse, get a little, interaction going. I now record every talk that I give on my phone, even if it's just an audio recording and not a video. But to go back after that first time, I was terrible in front of those 2 people. But that gave me enough to work on, where I could see, okay, here's where I need to work. Here's how I need to practice a little better. I take notes. I tweak the presentation every time I give it. My hope is by the end of the year, I'll be able to do a TED Talk on the 9 habits. And
that's awesome.
Distill an hour down into 18 minutes. That's going to be a real challenge. But I think, again, challenging yourself to keep thinking about it differently and keep distilling it down to find that message is really key.
No, I think that's well said. I want to point something out too, as we've been talking about it. First thing is I've definitely picked up that we needed a new segment. George, we started improving our programming here. I hope we're improving it, and we're looking at things people want to do. Based on listening to you two talk about that, I think we have a segment or more where we're going to talk about what is it really like to prep for a talk, for an internal presentation, for a whatever, because there's so many tips there and more we can do. So we'll come back to that. The other thing, Paul and I had this very conversation last week at Source Boston. And I said, how many times when you've created your keynote or presentation have you delivered it more than once? And Paul gave me that look. I get a lot, which I had a lot, which is why would I do that once I gave it? We're done, right? And I think a lot of the conferences perpetuate that. Have you ever given this before? Oh, yeah, well, if so, I don't want you here.
Yeah.
They got to knock that out, because George just said something that's really important. If I keep giving it and I get better at it and I figure out all the pieces of it, then I can turn it into a TED Talk. Then think about the analogy of campus tours. I can do all this different stuff with it. And that's what Paul and I got talking about last week a little bit, was think about how much more powerful it is. You get better at the segues. You get better at the examples. You've edited it down. It might be the 4th, 5th, 10th, 50th time you've delivered it, but that audience, it's still the first time they're hearing it. And I think that's massively important. Let's do this too, the 9 cybersecurity habits. So George, because we're about to run out of time here, George has already said that anybody, if you're a security leader and you want to talk about this and how he's rolling it out, he's happy to chat with you about it. And then I said, cool, how do we do that and not get too many people who should be contacting George in the process? So here's what we worked out. Send me a note. I'll introduce you right to George, and then you'll have it. So that way we're not giving out his contact details, so his phone doesn't ring off the hook too much. But if you want to talk about it, so the other thing is we'll bring George back to do a segment on the 9 cybersecurity habits. Set it up for us briefly, though, George. What are the 9 habits? What should people think about this? How is it benefiting you? Kind of sell it to us for the next time.
So again, the high level security is a behavior, not a competency. So it's a discipline, right? You have to practice it every day, just like a habit. It takes 21 days to make a new habit. First habit, literacy. You have to be able to get information about security and have a source for constantly getting new information. But once you learn to read, you've got to not believe everything you read. So the second habit is skepticism. Each habit builds on the last. Once you start to be skeptical of things, you need to apply that skepticism in a directed fashion, and we call that vigilance. You move from vigilance to the habit of secrecy, right? You need to be able to know what you're protecting in order to protect it. The next habit I've changed. I used to call it hygiene, which changing your password. There's a little bit of semantic baggage that I think goes along with hygiene, so we're calling it culture now, and I think that has a more comfortable tone. But again, what's the culture of your environment? The things that you do every day or every week or every month when it comes to security. Then diligence, right? You need a plan for coordinating all of those routines or hygiene behaviors into a coordinated response. And this is kind of the critical point in the 9 habits. A lot of people do the first 6 or so. The next one is federation. Again, name change. You can call it community, but there's only so much you can do on your own. You can be the biggest, strongest caveman in the world, but you've got to sleep, for at least a third of the day. You need to have a community in order to protect yourselves. And this is, federation is I think one of the key things that has allowed our society or culture to grow, is that community protection. Once you start sharing information with the community, the habit of mirroring comes in, because you need to know what you're sharing with those other people. You need to know what you look like to them. So we give the advice, Google yourself, or view your social media profile from an outsider's perspective. And then finally, the last habit is deception. So you've got to work in ways of defeating social engineering or other types of things, and deception is that habit, but it's one of the most difficult ones to master or to build a habit around.
The way my brain's processing, and so I'll look forward to this next conversation. I've already thought about how different organizations can implement a more localized version of this, but how it really, I love the work you've done distilling it down, thinking about it, breaking it up into categories. So those are the 9 cybersecurity habits. And that's essentially what George and I started talking about to come on the program. And then he wrote the other stuff, and there was so much there to talk about. And I really hope that what that shows a lot of other security leaders out there is there are other approaches. I mean, you're at higher ed, and one of the things you and I have talked about is the ability to influence without direct authority. You can't just go slam your fist on the table and tell them that's how it's going to be. There are different approaches, and you're pioneering them. You're certainly leading a lot of those. And so I really appreciate you taking the time, and we will have you back to go deeper into these 9 cybersecurity habits and how people can use them and position them. If anybody dying to talk to you in the meantime, send me a note, and I will happily connect you. And we'll look forward to more. So thanks for appearing with us. We're going to take a quick break, which is a good chance you can go to securityweekly.com and you can check out our shows. We have 7 different programs now to cover a lot of the different things we're trying to solve in the security industry. And you can check out our on-demand content. When we come back, we're going to get you some free time by showing you how you can get out all those meetings that are wasting your time.
Domain Tools helps security analysts turn threat data into threat intelligence. They take indicators from your network, including domains and IP addresses, and connect them with nearly every active domain on the internet. Those connections drive risk assessments, help profile attackers, guide online fraud investigations, and map cyber activity to attacker infrastructure. Fortune 1000 companies, global government agencies, and leading security solutions vendors use the Domain Tools platform as a critical ingredient in their threat investigations and proactive defenses. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/domain tools. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/BSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Welcome back. Paul and I have some articles and insights for you, and I want to just kind of quickly explain how this is going to start unfolding. So we were last week at Source Boston. We had a chance to be together, and as Paul said in the first segment, we didn't really get a chance to catch up and talk until the end of the day afterwards. I was really surprised how many people came up to talk to us about this program in specific. In fact, I didn't even share this with Paul yet, but one of them told us they've made some vendor choices because of watching this program. So hopefully that's the type of stuff that we're able to bring you. A couple people then specifically said, hey, when's the book club going to start? And hey, I love that performance idea. Yeah, definitely do a segment on that. Oh, and when are you going to talk about how to manage time better? When are you going to talk about those things? As I was putting together the articles today, I just wanted to give people a quick update on that. I'm working on it. You know, there's a big difference between putting together a quick article and pulling out the things that we like and riffing on it versus actually thinking through and giving you objectionable evidence on things that can be done or objective evidence that helps you make better decisions and get to those types of places. The other thing I'm looking at is by planning them in advance, we're trying to book guests like a George Finney or a Sean Tooma or somebody can come in and explain that. We're going to start that out next week. We got somebody coming in to talk to us about third-party risk management and what it was like building the program from the ground up with some real specific actionable items for anybody struggling with third-party risk and third-party risk management right now. So it's coming. Book club, I'm going to actually try to just sit down and pick out 6 books for the back half of the year and figure out a little bit of the mechanics of it. And we should be announcing that within the month and rolling it out probably right in the beginning of Q3.
I can't wait to see your recommendations, Michael, because I tell you,
I have too many now.
There's a big difference, though, between like other people's recommendations, what I might learn on my own, and your recommendations were like spot on, like life-changing. Those 3 books we talked about with The Brain Audit, Never Split the Difference, and Play Bigger. Like, awesome. I want more of that.
Yeah, well, and that's so what I've been trying to do now. And it's funny you bring that up, Paul. That's actually like I sat down this morning internally. We had a conversation here, and I said, all right, so I've got like 13, 14, 15 outlined, and these other 5 that have been really good for me. Mm-hmm. Whoa, what do we pick? So I'm actually trying to set some criteria that it needs to be good for us as a leader, good for us as an individual contributor, so it can work either way.
Yes.
And I'm adding a dimension. I want it to be good for my teenage children as well.
Sure.
That they can read along with it and start to think about some of these characteristics and maybe instill them a little sooner than it took, at least for me, to try to figure some of them out. The other thing I am trying to look at then is I want these to actually be useful, practical, actionable insights that you invest your time in it and go, oh, that's worth it. I easily got 2 or 3. Some of you have sent in book ideas and recommendations. I'm checking all those out as well. And what I'm going to try to do is skim and read ahead to really think through how we're going to do it and then go back through it with everybody. That said, if you've got a book club, like one of the online, hey, this is the book we're reading, why we liked it. Tell me what you like about it. Tell me what you wish it had. Because I'm trying to figure out things like, should we cover it over the course of a month? Like there's only gonna be one segment where we really get into it, but should we do you want updates? Do you want us to all kind of make sure we're reading it together? Like if you've got something you like, send me an email or shoot me a note and let me know what's working for you and how you like it. And that'll help us kind of shape this up. But that's in motion. So I'm trying to figure that out. And you're right, Paul, trying to find good suggestions and figure out how to integrate that, really work that forward. The performance side of things, we got a ton of options. The value prop scorecard side, quick update on that. You and I we did get the chance last week to talk about using this, and it was great. I had some conversations very much tuned on the scorecard, and we talked about 2 things: how we can use it within our teams to figure out where we need to focus, and then as Paul and I have been talking about, we're going to do a co-branded vendor scorecard, vendor value prop scorecard, I can't tell you how many people said to me, good, when is that available and how do we use it? Because I really need that. I've got too many vendors.
Yeah.
And
that's the one that's really catching on like wildfire, dude. And no offense to those dealing with real wildfires when they do happen. But I mean, just the feedback that I'm getting on, even myself, the reason I ask about the books and in this, even myself, if I put myself in the listener's shoes, I'm like, I really want that value prop scorecard. Like that's really going to help me.
Yep. And so what I did specifically at Source Boston was I got a chance to talk to some of these security leaders. And I said, hey, if we did this, if a vendor came to you and said, I know how to answer this, and went, oh, yep, I'm in. It would be more useful to me because I would know that after 5 minutes, if it doesn't make sense to continue, they're not going to waste my time. I got to figure it out. So there's a lot there. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take, and some of you who have reached out already talked to me. You'll be hearing from me this week. I'm going to do like a mini 6-week beta. And to be perfectly candid, that's part of what I'm going to figure out this week. I want to talk to some of you individually and with some teams. You can work with a couple of perhaps some of our partners or some vendors. Work some of these pieces through, see what it looks like, and then we'll unveil a more complete program starting back half of the year. So everything we've been talking about this quarter, we are slowly moving in that direction to increase that programming so that in any given month, we're showing you how to use the vendor scorecard. We're showing you different ways that and stuff that we're testing on how to improve our own performance and how to be better as leaders as well as better as individual contributors, and then the books. And so pretty much our programming should start to really fill itself out. And your feedback, listening to this, watching this, has really driven that. And as we do it, send more stuff in. We'll keep looking at how to do it better. So
awesome.
All right, so let's go through this. I put this one in because I think it's really important. We're going to open up, and in fact, I kind of broke a personal rule. I put 2 articles from the Harvard Business Review in. One of them is actually more of the magazine article. One's one of the blogs. They're both really good, and they kind of fit. So I spaced stuff out a little bit. Here's what we open up with: why people really quit their jobs. Here's what I loved about it, and this is their quote, direct quote. They left when their job wasn't enjoyable, their strengths weren't being used, and they weren't growing in their careers. Yeah. Think about that for a second. We always like to say, "Oh, people don't quit because of money." They're, well, if you exempt that, they don't quit the company. They quit the manager. They quit the leader. And what they basically said is, yeah, that's kind of true, but not really. Let's go deeper. What does that actually mean, right? I mean, it's not like everybody's a jerk. Oh, it's because they're not having fun. They're not learning. They're not growing. It doesn't make any sense. All right. So now juxtapose this with the security industry and the so-called shortage. I don't know. Some of you are really struggling. Well, if somebody comes and works with you, will it be enjoyable for them? Will they get to exercise their strengths and grow in that position? And what does that look like for them? And I got to tell you, for all the doom and gloom we've seen, Paul, I've had the pleasure this year to work with a couple high performance teams looking at issues like this, and they'll actually say to me, you know what, I like coming to work. I really thoroughly enjoy it. You sit down with a leader and they're talking about how they get together for lunches where they're not allowed to bring in electronics or talk work. Mm-hmm. They get to know each other. They're figuring stuff out. They figure out how to play to each other's strengths. So the point is, it really kind of works. And so how do you do this?
We do that at dinner here at Security Weekly, actually, right? I mean, that's one of the goals of those epic dinners.
Yeah,
get to know each other.
And it works, right? And so here's the thing. What they say in this article is design the work, then focus on the people. Design the work for the people. What that means is a lot of us will say, okay, I need a position that does X. Go find me somebody who fits that. And this says, you can actually do it the opposite way. I need somebody who's really talented. And when you identify somebody who's really talented, then you can say, okay, where are your strengths best used on my team today? Now, does that always work? No, but I'll give you an example in security where it's worked a lot. A lot of folks, right? I mean, George was just talking about how do we better conduct our outreach? How do we educate people? How do we work with them? I worked with a CISO last year, and his answer was he went out cycling, right? He's part of a cycling club, went out cycling. One of the guys was a teacher who didn't want to be a teacher anymore. And he said, hey, I got an idea. If I could give you the basics of security that I want to communicate, could you break it down and teach people? The guy went, absolutely. There you go. It's, new connection, brought somebody in, played to his strengths, give him something to grow on. Like it worked out really well for everybody. So the point is, I think we can do that. And the idea is, if you're trying to find somebody, right? So you're either trying to build your team, you want to keep your team, or you need to recruit new people to your team. I think you need to be able to answer these questions. Is somebody enjoying it? Are you enjoying it? Is your team having a good time? Because that's where they're spending a good portion of their waking hours. the team members feel like their strengths are being used and used properly? And are they growing? Are they learning?
Well,
and it doesn't always mean training, but are they getting better?
Used and used properly are two different things, right?
Fair
because
point.
you know, a lot of us do have skills. Like certainly we can fix people's printers and stuff. That's not necessarily something that we want to do, right? And I've certainly made career choices, you know, based on some of those things that, I was using my skills, but they weren't necessarily the skills that I wanted to grow and develop. And certainly, I think probably the number one reason I've made career changes is growth, right? In the current position, you look at the growth path and you're like, either it's not one that you want to pursue, like that's not where I'm going in my career, we're just going in two different paths, right? Or it's there really is no growth path for me, you know, beyond this. And those have been some major factors, and to really, it's my own personal career, why I've made, you know, choices. And, you know, now today, having my own business, I very carefully work with everyone to make sure that they've got a growth plan. Where do you go from here, kind of thing. So that's super important. Enjoyable is somewhat subjective. Certainly, if they have a growth path and using their strengths and building upon, you know, strength is not just a skill, right? Maybe they want to acquire skills and they're able to do that in their position. Both those things, I think, are main contributors, not all of them, to your enjoyment in the workplace. There's also, I think, Michael, culture, right, which we kind of touched on as well.
Yep. No, I think it's important because a lot of times we say either, you know, well, there's a shortage. What can I possibly do? Create the right environment. And this gave us some really smart ways to do it.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what
your manager is a huge, and we've covered, I think, articles about that. Your manager is a huge part of your enjoyment or not at work, certainly as well. And micromanagement, I can't ever remember a time when anyone's talked to me about any job or career where they're like, you know, I'm micromanaged at my job and I really love it. Like you never hear people say that, right?
Yeah. You know what? Really, I'd give this place an A+. Why? The micromanagement is
just awesome. I love it.
You know what people don't like are meetings.
That's true.
They're those necessary things. So here's what I really enjoyed about this particular article. So that it's titled, "The Company Spent 300,000 hours a year in pointless meetings." They basically broke out and said, okay, so we had this number of meetings, this number of support people supporting these number of board meetings, directors meetings, and it spent us like 300,000 hours in a year just doing that. What it points out, I think, are two things that we often overlook when we let ourselves be driven by meetings. The first of which is to be in a productive meeting, you need to do some level of preparation. And that may involve other people in the meeting also needing to support that meeting. So in other words, it's not just pop in for 20 minutes or an hour or whatever the meeting scheduled time is. If you say yes to a meeting, you're also agreeing to be prepared, to be present when you're there, and then to follow up on whatever comes out of it. And I know that's me asking for a lot because a lot of people are like, Michael, I show up. People talk. I didn't even need to be here. They could have sent an email, right? There's all sorts of stuff. So the question is, how do we get out of it? First thing it says is, right, think about what you accept. In other words, are you blindly saying yes to everything or no to everything? Or are you actually being thoughtful about it? Paul, I remember we had this conversation in an article a couple weeks ago on this. And the idea was, especially if you're in security, if it's a chance to get out and meet other people that are influential in the organization or that are the folks that you're trying to serve, and it's good for building the relationship, you should accept. If it's routine status updates and other things that really are handled by email, probably better to decline. Do you have any strategies you've kind of worked out?
Yeah, I think that a strategy we're employing now is kind of we just talk rather than sit down and have a formal meeting and kind of break up the meetings so that we're all just not stopping everything we're doing and talking about everything all in one meeting. You know, this year I've certainly made an effort to just make sure we just talk informally rather than, you know, tie everyone up in some kind of regular meeting. I think that's been working. I don't know, it's kind of a fluid thing that we're always working on, certainly. And we've toyed with the idea of like a scrum, but I'm kind of like, I've gotten away from the scrum style meetings because I'd rather just go talk to individual people or teams. And then have a meeting every once in a while where we all get together. Of course, I think the other thing too is if you find yourself having a lot of meetings and I think Michael can attest to this, right? It probably means you've got some communication or process issues elsewhere in the organization.
Yep.
And you can cut down on your meetings if you've really refined your processes. You've got taken things out of email, out of Excel spreadsheets. If you eliminate the need for a meeting, that's been my goal this year. And I think we have, to a large degree, certainly accomplished that we don't need to have a meeting about, like every single show, for an example, that everyone just knows what's going on because our processes have been refined over time, and we're constantly refining our processes and using technology to support that, such that we don't need meetings. Now we do. I think we do have sales meetings here. It's largely because Joe is our new salesperson, right? And those, I don't know. It's important that is some inside baseball, right? Michael and I have been working in this field for a really long time, likely over 20 years, right? And so we can look at a vendor and know what they do and be like, yeah, I think that's a good sales thing, or I know someone there, or whatever, and move the process along. And those meetings are important for that, because for me to do that informally, I think is hard. So I don't know. There's some inside baseball about meetings around here anyway.
No, and I like it. The thing I want to press on is that we're investing in the process. We're thinking about it. We're discussing it. We're investing in it. We're making those incremental changes, and then we're seeing what works and what doesn't work, and we're continuing to move forward. The teams that do that tend to do better. The teams that just kind of go, it's the way it is. I don't know, dude. My calendar fills up. I'm not allowed to say no.
Right.
You are allowed to say no. Let me tell you something. I've heard of a team implementing, and I personally really love this, and I've thought about how to do it better. Agendas and schedules. So the point is, if you're being invited to something and there's a meeting, well, I want to know how many meetings, and I want to know kind of what that schedule looks like and what you're expecting of me. Or even simpler, if there's an invite, there should be an agenda, and it should be clear. And that benefits everybody for a couple of reasons. It tells me what's up with the meeting. It also tells me what, if anything, I need to prepare, and what, if anything, I can anticipate I might need to do as a result of it. So here's the thing I've seen a team do, and I personally love this. I need to follow up and kind of get some details. If the meeting is scheduled and it does not have an agenda, it gets canceled. Mm-hmm. Now, the way they did it, they have one person on the team who's able and responsible to do that. So basically, their job is kind of go check the open meetings and kind of go, whoop, that one doesn't have an agenda. It's canceled. They said they've freed up so much time on the team because of that. And kind of like your point, Paul, I didn't need a meeting for that. I didn't need a scrum for that. I just needed to stop by and tell so-and-so, or I needed to update this spreadsheet. And so it's interesting the way to do that. And what I would say then is, think about that in terms of what you accept. If what you're accepting is clear, right? Like, okay, I get why I got invited to this. It's useful to me. Oh yeah, and look, they've got an agenda, and I got a good sense that they're going to run the clock the right way. Sure, accept that. But if you keep finding that people are wasting your time, then don't accept their meetings.
Right. And I think there's a classification of meetings where you have some meetings with the goal being that you don't have to meet about that topic anymore. And that's kind of the strategy I've taken. Like we don't need to meet about this topic because everyone should just know this information. So let's adjust the processes so we all know this information. That alleviates friction, as Michael has taught us, right? And now if we do have a meeting, we can talk about something new and exciting and plan the next series of meetings, build that into our process. So I don't really like the long-standing meetings, because it means that if we have to get in a room and talk about something that's operational as just one classification, that's probably bad, and we need to fix our processes. Now, there are times when you do want to meet, and the meeting should be exciting. It should be, we're meeting to brainstorm ideas about a new topic, about a new process, about a new product or service, right? Those are the exciting meetings that you want to attend. When someone says, well, we have to have a meeting every day and we have to go through all the tickets or some kind of process, I tend to find those are the meetings that people dread the most, right? Or like when everyone goes on the room and talks about what they're working on, those can be some horrible, horrible meetings.
Yeah, and typically that's when people reveal that they didn't prepare, they didn't do that work, and whatever else. We'll close this part on this. I've been telling people for the better part of to 2 decades, if the meetings don't serve you, cancel. And I've been getting a lot better about that myself. In fact, we're going to talk in a little bit. We're going to tie a bunch of these things together really fast. I'll show you how to get that time back in your day. I've been using those techniques myself. They work fine. Somebody really needs a meeting, I'm happy to do it. And I'm always, as we teach people the value prop, we keep teaching them straight talk. When you run a straight talk meeting, people get to the end, they were heard, they felt heard. They go, that was 25 minutes? Wow. Okay, cool.
Right.
Because you cut to the chase, but that takes a lot of time to get there. All right, OKR. Have you heard of the OKRs? Is that a concept you've worked with in any of the companies you've been part of?
What is it?
The OKR, the objective and the key result.
I have not.
Okay, so this is made famous by Google. It's been used a number of places, and it's what I just said. It's an objective and a key result. So the idea is that there's some level of planning or intention, and you say this is the objective, and this is the quantifiable key result. So you can't just say, for example, my objective, is better security, and my key result is security is better. That's not it. It needs to be something that you could look at pretty consistently. What's great, and part of the reason I got turned on OKRs was I had some of the early adopters of Straight Talk say, have you ever looked at OKRs? Mm-hmm. I said, well, why? And I said, well, because you're showing me how to do my OKR faster and better. Well, cool, I like it. So here's what Tomas Tunk puts into it that I hadn't considered, and I really enjoy it. Success, at least when he was learning to do them at Google, is 70%. Now think about that, because in security, right, and I've been guilty of doing this to my kids. Like they come home with like a lower test grade and you go, wow, what happened there? We're conditioned culturally that 100 is good. It's 70% is bad. And it's interesting because when I was more actively consulting and part of a larger consulting organization, they set utilization targets. They did not anticipate that everybody would work 100 billable hours a week. Mm-hmm. And I get it. Some places you're like, yeah, Michael, because it's 125. It's, it's whatever. Yeah, cool. The point is, if you were at that like 68 to 80% utilization, that was a success. And the rest of it was baked in. And that's what he's saying here. You want a goal that's hard enough that if you could just get 75% of the way there, 70%, that was good. It meant you set a stretch and you could get there and you were thinking about how to measure it. And I thought, that's really kind of interesting because a lot of times in security, we do those. I want to reduce attacks. I want to increase whatever. And I thought that was kind of interesting, but the sub point to this is he points out specifically the reason it works at Google is because it's consistent. As an individual, you have OKRs that should fit into your team OKRs that should fit into the division or the group OKR. The point is you're a more specific component of something larger. So when we're looking at teams, if you can get rid of the meetings and give people time back, what are they going to work on? This gives you a way to focus it and measure that it was done successfully. So I'm just, I like it. And I think if anybody else is using them, they should help out with that. Let me just cross right into the next one, and then we'll wrap these two together. This is the other Harvard article. Why you need an untouchable day every week. I love this. This is the kind of article that, frankly, read it and then go back and reread it, and then go back and reread it again. I read this a while ago, and it's really got me thinking about a lot of stuff. So we've talked over the last couple months about makers versus managers. Makers need a lot of uninterrupted space and time. They can get into the flow. They can get things done and figured out. It's that deep work and all that type of stuff. The managers are the ones who say, I've got all these things that need to get done, and we're going to manage the time. There's no right. There's no wrong. In fact, what I'm kind of finding is the answer is often, yep, need a little bit of both. Now, we've talked to some extent about chaos time and building time in. And I want to just kind of point on this because we're going to have to do a segment on this. But I've been working with a lot of teams that kind of split their responsibilities between something operational and then as well something that's more consultative or educational or what have you. And they say, but Michael, we've got to be reactive so much. How do I possibly do this? That's the answer, right? You can book in time into your day, into your week, and even into your month that says, I know this time is going to be reactive. And that's your time for it. And then here's the other stuff around it. The untouchable day basically says you have got to get yourself a space once a week where it doesn't get canceled. You work on it. You get it done. And what I really liked about it was the suggestion you schedule them weeks in advance. In the article, he said he schedules them 16 weeks out. And then his only rule is this: they can't be deleted, but they can be moved. So you get a keynote, you need to go work with a client. Something really important there on, in your day scheduled was Thursday. So you can push it to Friday or Wednesday. Use any other day between the bumpers of the weekends. But every day, once a week, you've got to have time where you're not touchable. What I loved was the conclusion. He's done it for a year. So people will say, well, what if there's an emergency? What if there's a this? He's like, yeah, it hasn't happened yet. But if it did, we can handle it accordingly. He said, now that I've been purposely scheduling a day a week for the last year, do I continue to schedule? He's like, yes. In fact, some days I block out 2. And I went, yep, there you go. If somebody can do this and they actually implement it, what I've found a lot of people do, Paul, is they'll say, oh, I totally want to do that. I like this idea that, okay, so here's how they kind of go together. Stop accepting stuff that you don't need to unless it's aligned with your OKRs, your objective and your key result. I would not define more than 3 for myself. And even then, that might be a stretch. But again, if you get to 70%, you're doing well. Cool. So then within those, give yourself at least a day a week to go advance those key things, or 2 days a week, one that looks at how you do as a team and as individuals, and a day. Telling you, when you do that, it makes such a difference. And you've been talking about that. How do you feel? I mean, it's got to be tougher for you with all the shows that we record. How do you get that time you need to do that deeper work?
Like having a whole day, that's for like in a more managerial kind of role, probably not in the cards. Technical folks, I think if you're a technical person or managing technical people, you got to give them that day. You got to say, this is your day, no meetings. This is your day or half a day to go work on something creative that maybe like larger companies doesn't relate necessarily to your work. Like I feel that stuff is very, very important. I think for me, and I think for a lot of us, right, we got a lot of wheels in motion. You got to block off time. I do block off time today where you can work on specific things. What I like to do, and it's just the way that I work, I tend to have like 3 different things that I know I really want to work on or need to work on. Hopefully it's both, right? And when I get to that time, I have a choice of things I can work on because my brain just might not be in the right place to, especially when it comes to writing. Like there's a lot of my job today that requires descriptive writing. And I feel like there's a certain mood or mode you got to be in to do some of that descriptive writing. When I get in that mode, I try and get as much done as I can, get out ahead of it and do all that descriptive writing. And if that just doesn't catch me, or maybe I write something and I go, I know I need to get back to that, I'll switch and go do something technical, right? I'll do some technical prep for a webcast or a show. Usually I'm in a good place to do something technical, as I don't get as much time as I used to do that stuff. So I think for me, I don't know if it works for other people, that's great too. Having a list along with some blocked off time so you can kind of pick and choose. Maybe I read an article and I'm like, I'm really kind of motivated to do this. Like, I know I've got some descriptive writing to do, but like, I got to get this piece done. And then I know the next day I've got a block of time as well. Now I can work on that descriptive writing piece. So I think you got to kind of balance. I'm still working with my schedule. I need to come up with a new kind of work schedule for myself where I've got a little more of that flexibility. I think in the past it's been a little too rigid. Like I've blocked out some time and I have to work on this. And I'm like, well, I just read an article and I really want to do this, prep this technical segment because that's what's, tickling my fancy right now. So I think for me, especially, you got to be flexible with it as much as you can.
It's a classic Goldilocks problem, right? It's if we're too rigid, it doesn't work. And if we're too loose, it doesn't work. It's that just right. You're on a journey to figure out, I'm on a journey to figure out, which means we're going to have a really cool segment on this somewhere in the next couple of weeks. And we'll share what we've learned, and I'm also going to then share some other strategies and things for people to check out. The last article for discussion, and we're about out of time, so I'm going to make it quick, it was how good customer experience could turn bad. Swipe with the credit card. It was pretty well written, and the person was talking about going to Vegas, and the card reader in the back of the cab stopped working. The cabbie said, oh, no worries, there's a procedure for this, and then he goes on to describe it, and it was mind-numbing for everybody. And he said, it either meant that they thought through that this would happen and had a really good backup plan in place, or it just happens all the time and they have a real bad system for handling it, but there's no other choice. And it turned out to be that. His point, though, going on through it, that I just wanted to point out from a security perspective is, do we think about what the experience is like? And it says, listen, you need to treat your employees like customers. Now, I've worked with a bunch of security teams that actually feel that they serve the rest of the organization and they are, in fact, their customers. But then think about how your customers are using the technology to serve your customers and your end users. Paul and I have talked both on air and off air about a bunch of organizations just using security as an excuse or a bludgeoning tool. Hopefully, you're not falling prey to that. But flip side, have you looked at what that process is like for the ultimate consumer of whatever services you're providing? Because I find it's overlooked in a lot of places, and not just in security. But that starts to give us the ability, when people have an interaction with you and it's pleasant, to like, wow, that was a security team. That was great. And so there's more there on that. I thought it was a good example, and that'll help us figure it out. But we'll take a quick break, and that gives you a chance to go to facebook.com/securityweekly. You can check us out, like the page, which means you'll get updates on all the fantastic stuff we're doing, and you keep in touch with and influence us on all the things you'd like to see. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the IPOs and other acquisitions and mergers happening in the security community. Still 85.
Are your existing solutions able to take advantage of real threat intelligence? Common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. PolyWall by Bandora Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed in partnership with the Department of Defense, PolyWall is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial today at bandorasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly.
All right. Well, we're going to get to the innovation updates as we like to talk about it. The reason we do it this way, it's both a little bit of a heritage of when we got started looking at startups and security, but what's also becomes important is it's understanding the trends. It's understanding who's getting funded and why, how things are unfolding, and to get a chance to look at some pretty cool solutions that you may not yet have seen. So that's why we tend to do this. But don't forget about our on-demand material. So you can check that out, which got some of our previously recorded webcasts. And Paul and I have one we recorded, was it last week, Paul? 2 weeks ago? So we've got a whole bunch of stuff that's finding its way there. And it gives you the ability to get really thoughtful points of view from a lot of our partners and sponsors of the program. And that's important because, again, just like we do with everything else here, we make sure that it's on point. It's not a marketing pitch. It's somebody talking to you about the problem and how they solve the problem and why you might want to talk to them. And it's our effort to try to cut through more noise, streamline, get people the things that they want. So that's a lot of what you could check out there. So, Paul, I opened up with what I think is good news, and it's fascinating because even good news in security has to be twisted as bad. Data breaches decline in number. And I left off the back half of that, which says, but billions are still exposed. It's still horrible, even though everything about it says it's good. Why am I putting this here? Well, first of all, there's a couple of key points that came out of it, and I wanted to be able to give that to you, and that to me feels more innovative. Second of all, it could be a sign that, hey, all these companies that we're covering and all these things are actually making a difference. The third thing is, just because things are going good doesn't mean that we're not important, folks. So the role that we play in our organizations is continuing to evolve. It's continuing to its importance is continuing to grow. When I share stuff like this, it doesn't mean that we're not doing a good job or suddenly we're not going to be needed. It means good job. So Q1 2018, 4-year low in terms of the number of actual data breaches, and only 1.4 billion records exposed, which I guess it's a lot, but it's down from 3.4 billion last year, and 1.27 billion of those were the result of fraud. Now, I don't exactly understand what that means. It was a result of fraud, but it was kind of like that hand wave, like, the reality is we're into the millions in terms of what the records exposed are. Now, what does that actually mean? How many of those records had been previously exposed in some potential way? What's the actual harms that comes from it? And by the way, 1.4 billion records out of how many trillion? Guys, we're doing a great job, and you're doing a great job, and that's really good. Email phishing. Now, this is based on how it was reported, from 31. Or down to 31 from 214 the year before. So, of course, they say, well, I mean, it's great, but maybe it's not great. Maybe, bad stuff is still happening, and maybe, look, it could be a blip, right? We're looking at 1/4 of data over 4 or 5 years of data. But we also saw the rise of cryptocurrencies and crypto mining and crypto jacking. Maybe what we're just seeing is that people are shifting their focus, and the things that we called breaches really not as important. And there's other things that attackers are after. In fact, we've said for years, attackers are after either your system or access to the information, right? They want the system, the CPU, the cycles. And over the last decade, we've kind of backed away from that. So they don't care about that. They just want the info. No, I think they're back to that. I think it's that's what people are starting to take a look at. So listen, this is good news, and I thought we should start the week and get everybody fired up with some potential good news. Couple mergers that came out. PhishLabs, Brand Protect had a merger. Now, it's a merger, but then if you go dig into it, PhishLabs took on $20 million in funding, $20 million additional like this month, and OPS they bought Brand Protect, but they're treating it as a merger. So PhishLabs is actually based here in South Carolina. And their idea, the way that I understand that they've been doing it today is they try to help people determine and then stop phishing attacks. And Brand Protect does the same thing. It's a Canadian company, does the same sort of thing, but then offers you the ability to help better manage your brand online and deal with those types of reputational issues. And they said, hey, combined, we'll be better. Threat intelligence mitigation services, like it's kind of interesting to me how this gets broken down. They've taken on $31.7 million in funding over 4 rounds. And what I find interesting about this space, Paul, is we've seen a lot of other people doing something similar that have either recently changed names, acquired to get bigger, or they're being acquired by others and kind of turning into features. So if you're doing stuff with phishing today, you're doing stuff with awareness, you're trying to give people that intelligence. You see this as a feature, or do you think that some of these companies are going to be big enough they can stand alone and continue?
I'll go out and say that this represents an emerging category, and I think that we can it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds, but we see social media security companies, we see intelligence security companies. I think they're trying to all tackle a similar problem, that an attacker is trying to impersonate your employees, or an attacker is trying to use social media or parts of your brand with domain names, as we've seen with domain tools as well, as part of the attack against your organization. And there is this new emergence of companies that are trying to help solve this problem or this particular set of problems. I think it'll be interesting to see if we end up with one category or two, and who the category kings will end up being. But I definitely think that this year is a year of emergence in these various categories. I also see a lot more inbound requests for more information on how we combat this level of threat. I think it started out with the flashpoints of the world and understanding that deep web, dark web intelligence. And I think these markets are maturing, and I think that we're going to see continued growth in these areas.
So short run, it turns into a category, and in the long run, we'll wait and see. And either a couple of them grow into big platforms that interact with other stuff because it's nuanced, because they're so good at it, and some I think probably get consumed into others. By the way, right? I mean, that's congratulations for them. Sometimes I get so quick to the analysis, but this is exciting stuff, and it's good for us in our industry. So good job. Avast cut the proposed IPO range. So I think this is interesting on a couple levels, and I tried to push into a little bit more. So if you remember, this is a company, global, well-known, and according to the link I've got there, the Reuters link, they're doing well as a company. A couple years ago, they had plans to go public in the U.S. markets, and then they pulled those plans for a variety of reasons, and then recently said, hey, you know what, we're gonna debut on the FTSE in London, and that's really exciting. What we've seen lately with most security IPOs is that they've cheated up the range, or they've increased, let's be more precise, they've increased the range of the offering for the IPO based on anticipated demand leading up to it. And a lot of them have done really well on their first day of trading. So Avast, interesting enough, said, all right, we're going to cut it. But here's the thing. They're cutting back what they're thinking. They're only selling 25% of the stock. The goal is only to raise $200 million. It creates a market cap of about £2.5 billion. And it would still set the record as the largest ever UK IPO in the tech sector. This is fantastic. And it's another sign of companies, even long-standing established companies, able now to capitalize on that because of the growth and the importance of security. I think it's a fantastic, it's a trend, and I want to see more of it. So I really like it. The only thing I'll say is it's interesting looking at the different exchanges because it's in pence and pounds and also in US dollars. Like, they don't use them interchangeably to the point of being confusing. It's just confusing if you don't commonly do the math in your head. And I don't. SafeBreach. Have you come across SafeBreach, Paul?
Yes. I've. This is a category that I'm tracking more and more closely today. My prediction so far is that it will be a category. I think that, and I don't mean any disrespect, right? But I don't see vendors in this space that have really crossed the chasm into, like, everyone needs some budget for this, and it fits in your security architecture. I think there's a smaller percentage of companies that have used this technology to success, that is attack simulation. And I think you're going to see, in my guess, more funding and maybe some acquisitions, although I'm not quite sure who the bigger companies are that are going to acquire this technology and use it the best. I mean, if I were a vulnerability management company, this could be kind of interesting. I think this is something I've always wished was kind of glommed onto vulnerability management, right? Go in and actually attack the systems, do some kind of simulation to prove missing vulnerabilities or identify missing vulnerabilities, feed that back into your vulnerability management program. Of course, a lot of it is also showing shortcomings in your existing security solutions, which is a vulnerability, but not in the like patchable sense that we think of it. I think this market's really interesting. Again, I think you're going to see a ton more funding.
You say that, Paul.
And some acquisitions.
I wonder if that becomes one of those barriers. It's that I don't want to know. I don't want to know what's wrong. I don't want to test it too discreetly. And what I mean by that is to too small a level, because what if it tells me I'm not doing the right stuff?
And I mean, I saw that in vulnerability management all the time. People are like, oh, right. I don't want to know about all those vulnerabilities because then I have to go fix them. Like, oh my God, I can't, I don't want to stick. I have slides with, the ostrich or whatever is it an ostrich that sticks their head in the sand? Like, yeah, because that's been an issue in the past. So I think this is a really exciting category, and I'm curious to see what comes next for it.
Well, so SafeBreach, they raised $15 million. It's a Series B. So when we look at a Series B, that should mean, in fact, somebody recently wrote a piece that said, just break it down to their early stage, they're the seed stage, they're figuring it out, they're growing. Okay, cool. This to me tells me that they're still figuring it out. They did a $15 million Series A July 2016, expecting the run rate to go about 2 years. This is the right time. It's $15 million Series B. It didn't get smaller, which is not surprising. It also didn't seem to grow exponentially, and it's right about on that 2-year mark. So everything about this says that it's really good. They say they do simulation and validation. To me, Paul, I think the missing piece on this, or if they do it, that I'd push forward is training. I after observing some of the stuff that the National Guard does in terms of their cyber exercises and the way that they're able to bring the civilian sector together and the commercial sector together, along with law enforcement and the state-run military side of things. If you could create for me training centers and simulations and what we call cyber ranges, I think that was fantastic. So if I've got somebody who's able to do some simulation and can validate some of the controls, if it just influenced my training a little bit, I mean, I guess I could look at how it's working and then use that as training. Wow, like what a difference, I think. So we'll see where it goes. But $34 million over 3 rounds. They seem to be doing great, and I like your assessment of the space. And I think we'll see more of it as it goes forward, especially because we're really getting to that point, Paul, where I don't think we can say to somebody, well, I'm not really sure what's working or not. I haven't really tested my controls. I think we're getting to that point where somebody says, hey, did your controls work the right way or not? All right, so Red Canary, $6.3 million in equity. So here's some details on them, because I got some thoughts on this, and I'm kind of curious where you go. So first of all, we did an episode with Brian Baer. This is episode 14. It's very early in our process. I still remember it was a great interview, great discussion of what it was like. And you can go check out that interview that we did at the beginning of this. They've taken on $14.9 million in funding over 3 rounds. Their Series A was a $6.2 million Series A, July 2016. So taking on equity at this point tends to suggest that, in fact, I looked at their SEC filing. It's just operating cash. They needed to keep going. I think, so there's a couple things. They did the atomic framework, right? Red Canary.
Atomic Red Team.
Thanks. And I was going to say, I know we did a webinar on it.
Yeah, we did a webcast with them on it. Yep.
And we've talked about all these other ways to start to take a look at your endpoints and to figure it out. We also saw Carbon Black IPO in the last couple of weeks. We know the endpoint space is hot and hotly contested. And I think it's smart for Red Canary to say, okay, we're going to show people how to better test, and we're going to show them what we're able to do. But I also think it's a highly competitive space. So to me, a $6.3 million equity round at about the 2-year point on their Series A kind of says, all right, we need to keep spinning here to figure it out. And either we're going to see that they found a gear and they're good to go, and this is what they needed as a lifeline to do it, or they're going to start looking for somebody to combine with, or however that tends to work out. That's kind of my take on it. I have no insight. Like, I didn't reach out to Brian. I didn't reach out to anybody. This is just me trying to take a look at that and how these things seem to matter. But here's the thing. That's not a small amount of money. Like, that's not – I don't see this as a negative. It's just more an understanding of where they're at in the process and what opportunities they have to go forward. Because for somebody to write a check like this, they see value. And so that's equally interesting to me, right? There's a validation. It's just maybe they need a little bit more time to figure it out. What's your take on it based on your experience in the space?
I think it's obviously a good thing for Red Canary, and I think it's kind of there's so many different aspects to the endpoint security, and that it'll be interesting to see how the categories kind of play out, right? Like, they list their competition as the big players: Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, Cylance. but I feel like that they've just got a different point of view on the problem. And it'll be interesting if they can create their own category. I think going directly against, those bigger players on the endpoint security side is challenging. I think there's some companies that are up to it, but I think there's also an opportunity to create your own category or subcategory and still be very successful.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. One of the things I learned from you, and we recently did a whole bit on EDR, is that we're kind of seen as a little bit, right? Like you might be really good at the endpoint and therefore the detection part. You might be really good at the response part. You might be really good at the content. Like it's not so simple anymore to just go, what'd you do for endpoint? Like there's more questions that have to be asked, and there's more ways to take a look at it. So, and like I said, I like their approach of, hey, let me teach you how to do it better. Let me teach you how to test it. Let me show you how this works. So, this is, I view this as a success for them, and we'll kind of see where that goes. That was it. Stuff moving in the space. There's still IPOs, there's acquisitions and mergers, there's companies getting funded. It's a good time to be in security. So you can let us know what you think. Let us know too if you're using these companies or if you've been influenced by the interviews we've done or the things that were covered to check out some of these companies and it's worked out. Please tell us. It just helps us feel good, but it gives me insights and it helps me sharpen some of the stuff that we're able to do. You can always catch us on Twitter. I'm at Catalyst. Follow us at Security Weekly. And you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on our website. You can just shoot us a note. Look forward to it. Until then, we'll see you next Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern, live on YouTube and Facebook. You can watch us or follow along whenever you can. Be safe. See you next week.